Welcome to Understanding the Bible. This is Pastor Stephen, episode 43, Presidential Election 2024. Now, last time we covered Halloween, and I told you I was going to talk about subjects other pastors don't like to talk about or people don't want to hear. And I know politics is one of those, but it's real important that we get into that. This is a very important election, as they all are, I suppose, but let me start with this. We all know that governments have done shady things in the past. Okay, we know about the 100 million people that have been killed by communist governments in the last 100 years. A simple study of human history shows that governments do bad things. A study of American history shows that our country's no different, other than how we started, and that our form of government is a republic, not a democracy. You see, in a democracy, the many can vote to take away your rights, because if you get enough votes, you win, right? So the republic was intended to ensure the rights of individuals. That's why we got the Bill of Rights in our Constitution that restricts government, to ensure that individual people have more rights than the government does. So either you believe that the government is ultimately good, and we must always obey them, as the Bible says, obey those who have authority over you, or you realize that governments are ultimately bad and must constantly be restrained. Even the whole Old Testament talks about how God had to restrain the Israelite government because they were doing things evil in the eyes of God, right? So what should we do as Christians? Should we even vote? If so, for who? Let's take a look at Christians' role in politics. And when I say Christian, I'm talking about New Testament believers who follow Jesus Christ. That correlates in the Old Testament to followers of God, Yahweh. So we have a few people who got involved in politics that I want to share with you. You may not have heard of Jael. She was a private citizen who rose up against an evil king. She used violence to get her hands bloody by assassination. Judges chapter 5 is an entire song about her bravery and how it saved the Jews. So God uses warriors to enact his vengeance and justice against evil governments. Violent revolution is completely within the scope of God's calling for his people. Judges 4:17. Howbeit Sisera, who was the general of the enemy king, fled away on his feet to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin and the king of Hazor in the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael went out to meet Sisera, and said unto him, Turn in, my lord, turn in to me, fear not. And when he had turned in unto her into the tent, she covered him with a mantle. And he said unto her, Give me, I pray thee, a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. And she opened a bottle of milk, and gave him drink, and covered him. Again he said unto her, Stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be, when any man doth come and inquire of thee, and say, Is there any man here? Thou shalt say, No. So here's the scenario. They're at war. He runs away. The enemy general runs away, takes refuge in her tent, and asks for her protection, right? And in this day, think of what it meant to be a woman back then. This is huge, all right? Verse 21, Then Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail of the tent, and took a hammer in her hand, and went softly unto him, and smote the nail into his temples, and fastened it to the ground. For he was fast asleep and weary. So he died. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him, and said unto him, Come, and I will show thee the man whom thou seekest. And when he came into her tent, behold, Sisera lay dead, and the nail was in his temples. So God subdued on that day Jabin the king of Canaan before the children of Israel. One example of a woman getting into politics and assassinating the enemy general. All right, that's amazing. Then you have Joseph. If you all remember Joseph from and the 12 brothers, the original tribes of Israel came from them. That's in Genesis 41. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. In Egypt, he was in prison unjustly. He served the king, though, and he gave God the credit. And because of that, he was appointed to run the nation's economy to prepare for a famine. He was in charge of buying and selling everything that happened in the nation of Egypt for like 7 years until the famine came. And then he was in charge for 7 more years during the famine. He used his position in power and politics to save his family, the 12 brothers, which became the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, Esther is another one. The whole book is named after her, Esther, okay? If you want to read that book in the Old Testament. She was in politics in the Medo-Persian Empire. She was just a godly person who was actually forced into a beauty pageant. She won and became the queen. So there's a whole lesson here about beauty. Not even going to get into that. But she used her position in politics to petition the king to make a law that ultimately saved the entire Jewish people. Here's another one in a foreign country, Jonah. Again, there's a whole book named after him in the Old Testament. Jonah 1 verse 2, God says to him, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." So if you don't know the story, Jonah didn't want to go. He had personal reasons. He hated them. They were evil people. Ripley's, believe it or not, actually has some artifacts from Nineveh. They flayed people alive and used their skin to make things. Okay, this was an evil city. Got it? So Jonah didn't want to go. He was tossed. He fled the other direction. He was tossed overboard, and God sent a great fish to swallow him. He was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, and then he got spit up on the beaches near Nineveh. And so he was like, "Okay, God, I'll go." And then he went. And he basically got into politics and cried against the city. Jonah preached openly in the streets against the king of Nineveh, against the people and against the city for their wickedness. At that point, he was not afraid to speak out. Now, that's a real city. Nineveh is near the modern-day city of Mosul, Iraq, and at the time, it was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It was basically the center of politics and culture, and Jonah was afraid to get involved. But God made him get involved in politics. And what happened was the king actually repented, and they changed. David is another one. Read the book of 1 Samuel. Remember, he killed Goliath as a boy. Shepherd boy used the sling and killed Goliath, the Philistine. He saw an army doing nothing. He saw the Jewish nation allowing him to discredit their God and scoff at their God and to call out in the open air that the Jews were dogs and so on, and that God obviously was not real. Their God didn't mean anything. And he didn't allow it. He stood up and he did something about it, right? He killed the guy. Now, he served King Saul as merely a musician in the castle. So in politics, he had a menial task in the government. God said he was a man after God's own heart. He also lived as a spy in a foreign country while waging war against the enemies of Israel. That's in 1 Samuel chapter 27. Then, if you read all through that story, all the way through 2 Samuel, he became the second king of Israel, and he secured the borders of Israel and united the kingdom in protecting the borders and defeating anyone who tried to come in. That's interesting. Of course, he's the first one who made Jerusalem the capital of Israel. That was circa 1003 BC. So Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for 3,027 years. So anyone who is advocating, now that's a whole thing about Palestine and Gaza and all that crap, where people say that Israel stole their land. I'm sorry, those people have only been around for like 60 years or so. Jerusalem has been around for over 3,000 years, and there's history to prove it. So let's not even go there. But David got involved in politics, and of course he became the king. Here's one that I really like, is the story of Ehud. Read Judges chapter 3. He used intrigue and a false gift to gain an audience with the king of Moab, who he assassinated with a left-handed dagger to the king's belly. He then fled, got away from the castle, called the Jewish army down from the mountains to destroy the enemy from within who had taken over the cities of Israel. He called the rednecks down from the mountains to kill everyone in government. Interesting. Then we go to the New Testament. We have Paul, Acts 21, 22, and 23. He used his citizenship to argue his case in Rome, demanding an audience with a higher ruler, and even one time avoided public flogging by using his politics, his citizenship, to protect him. So getting involved in politics is throughout the Bible. The question is, coming up in this election in November, is, does voting matter? Why does it matter to you as a Christian? Well, Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. Do you want to rejoice or do you want to mourn? So in America, how do you get the righteous to be in authority? Well, we have the right to vote. That chooses who is in power, all the way down to your city's judges, your county's judges, and your police chief. Or not the police chief, the sheriff. Those things are voted on in each county of America. So if Christians don't get involved, who then gets voted into power by default? The people who don't care about God. Right? So you got to think about that. If you don't vote, you are by default choosing to allow ungodly people to be in power. So why should we vote? Here's another reason why it matters. When you are restricted from serving God, anyone remember the government shutdown of churches, but the bars and the strip clubs got to stay open? Anyone remember that? COVID? When your honest and peaceable life is threatened via excessive taxes, regulations on everything you do, you have to make a change in your government, because if you don't, it will only get worse. 1 Timothy 2, 1 and 2 says, I exhort therefore that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and givings of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. If you don't think your life is quiet and peaceable, start with prayer for those in authority, and then exercise your right to vote. Edmund Burke famously said, all that is required for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. Hey, look at David and Goliath when the entire nation, the army, the king of Israel, let Goliath stand up and put down their people, their nation, and even their God. God used a simple man, a teenager, to physically stand up and fight. I believe the Bible said he was 17. It changed the course of history because David didn't merely pray for God to fix it. He prayed for God to help him as he moved forward, ran towards the enemy, chose a weapon, and killed the bad guy. 1 Samuel 17. Now, if you want to talk about the rulers are, supposed to be someone that we honor, and the Bible says we're supposed to obey those who are in authority over us, right? Rulers are to punish evil and to reward good. And I'm going to read that verse. It comes from Romans here in just a minute. But when criminals have more rights than innocent people, those in authority are no longer God's ministers for good. When good people are put in prison for doing what is morally right, the authority and the government is no longer the ones that we're required to obey. Don't even get me started on the number of soldiers and Marines in jail for defending themselves against known terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan, on trial for killing people who were known murderers during a war. Now that kind of crap is coming to our cities in the form of not allowing cops to arrest people who are committing crimes, gang members crossing the border with kids that they have bought or stolen so that they can claim asylum as a, quote, family. Venezuelan gangs taking over entire apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado and San Antonio, Texas, happening this week. January 6ers peacefully protesting an obviously stolen election, being put in jail without a trial for 4 years. Think about what that does to their spouse and kids without their mom and dad for this long. Do you guys have any idea of the level of evil actively happening in our government? Jeffrey Epstein. Not to mention the billions being laundered through foreign governments back to our elected officials, their campaign funds, and their family members with their own little LLCs that just spontaneously came up and they get, $1 million deals with. Romans 13:3 says, and this is the one that people misquote all the time, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that does evil. So those verses about obeying those that have power over you, the rule over you, that God puts them in power, is because they are to be executors of God's vengeance and wrath on evil. They are not to prop up evil. They are not to attack the innocent. So obeying the authority, that's talking about good, godly authorities that punish evil. Not when they've flipped it where good is evil and evil is called good. So voting is a huge deal because when you have the right to choose who is an authority over you, that vote is the difference between freedom and slavery. Because if I get to choose and I have a say in who the electors are, and then they make up the electoral college and they get to choose who the president is, and they look at my vote for president and they make their decision based on how many people voted in each state and county for the president, and then they make their decision based off of that. That's where you get the democratic part of it, where supposedly if the majority of people in their state vote for one person, then the electoral college will vote for that person and they'll become the leader. That's where we have freedom. We have the choice in America to choose those electors, to choose the state representatives, and then they make the choice for us for president. And if you don't have that chance to cast a vote, you're a slave. Because those people who are in power in our three branches of government, in the judicial branch, those people are chosen by the president. Then you have the executive branch, which is the president and his office, his cabinet members. And then you have the Congress, which is like 528 members, I believe it is, that are chosen by each individual state. And those are the people that you're voting for that make all the difference. And they make the laws that determine how much of your own money that you've worked for you get to keep. Now think of medieval times, and if you're a slave, where the guy owns a plantation with all the land, and he's like, I'll let you sleep here in this little house in this portion if you work on the ground for me and you produce cotton or whatever. And I get all the cotton and I sell it and I give you just enough to provide you with food and a place to live. That's essentially what taxes are when you don't have a choice in it. You get to keep 65% of your income, and then we'll tax you every time you spend it. And then whatever property you buy, your house, your car, your boat, whatever, we'll tax you every year on that. So essentially it comes down to you end up keeping about, I want to say it's 40% of your income. And if you don't have a say in who is running our government, then you're a slave. They're taking 60% of your blood, sweat, and tears and your time, your life that you have earned working for that money. They're taking 60% of it without your say-so. So we have an opportunity to vote in America. And if you get that taken away from you, you have zero say in who makes the laws and takes your money. And you're effectively a slave. Now, I'm not saying voting gives you a lot of say, but it gives you a little bit of say in who makes the laws, right? We have had illegals voting since 2020. In Springfield, Missouri, we had a news station reporting on illegals being bused to multiple polling stations all day long. They followed the buses, and illegals were voting 7, 8, 9 times at every polling station. We know it's been happening in our country. To say it doesn't happen is to be ignorantly foolish or foolishly ignorant. If you don't think illegals voting all around this country multiple times is happening, then you just have your eyes shut and you don't care. We also have Democrats actively promoting voting multiple times on social media. Facebook admitted on C-SPAN that they gave false voting information to Republicans on the dates and places to vote to try and keep them from voting. They also admitted in front of Congress that they hide data and Google hides search results for legislation to get people to think that Republicans are lying about things. We also know from the last two elections that Dominion voting machines have switched votes. Also, hundreds of thousands of votes mysteriously uploaded on these machines after 2 a.m. when the counting was supposedly stopped in every swing state. All you got to do is Google Harry Hursty. He's a hacker that buys voting machines and proves that their integrity is questionable. Just one of many, many proofs. What about not requiring voter ID? Look, you need ID to fly, to drive a car, to check into a hotel, to get money from a bank, to open a bank account, to pick up a prescription at Walmart. To buy beer, you need an ID. Fact. More people drink alcohol in America than choose to vote. So why would we think that you can't get an ID to vote? The only reason to not require ID is so that you can allow fraud, so people can vote multiple times and we have no way to track it. That's the only reason. Or to get people who are not who they say they are to vote, that kind of thing. So the question is, when you vote, as a Christian who tries to get good people in authority in our country, who should I vote for? And I'm just going to put it like this, guys, not Democrats. Don't get me wrong. Republicans can at times be just as bad, just as corrupt, and just as deceitful. But the entire party platform of the Republicans is in direct opposition to the corruption and deceit. Of course, there are bad apples. I don't agree with all of them. All right. But in America, there's only two real choices of anyone that has a chance of becoming president, either a Republican or a Democrat. Because you have, 100 million or 160 million voters or something like that in America. And if you split it down the middle, you've got 80 million here, 80 million there. Well, if a third of the Republicans vote for Green Party or something else, or Libertarian or whatever, then now you only have 2/3 voting out of those 80 million for a Republican, and the Democrat wins by default. Vice versa with the Democrat Party. If, a third of them goes for another candidate, then the Republican wins by default. So your two choices are Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Look at this. Trump admits that God spared his life at the assassination attempt. He may not be a Christian, okay? But he upholds the Christian values of God, country, individual freedom, and being a good steward of the possessions that God has given us. And he openly praises God. Kamala and the Democrats laugh at God. The Washington Times, August 14th of this year, put out, Democrats have officially abandoned God. They booed putting God back into their platform. Back in 2012, the chair did it anyways. And in 2024, God is taken out of their platform. It's not even as an aside that we have God-given rights. That part was removed. They don't want God. They openly lie about everything. Kamala just recently said this about the January 6, 2020 protest. Quote, We here know January 6th was a tragic day. It was a day of terrible violence. There were attacks on law enforcement. 140 law enforcement officers were injured. Some were killed. And what did Donald Trump say last night about January 6th? He called it a day of love. The Americans are exhausted with his gaslighting, Harris said. Enough. We know all of that's a lie because, in fact, the only person that died was Ashley Babbitt. I think there was a woman that was trampled too. But unarmed women, and Ashley Babbitt, I've listened to the radio calls that the cop who shot her stated before he went into the room where she was when the door was closed, he planned to kill somebody. He drew his gun when there were no guns. Everyone was unarmed there. There was no weapons at this supposed insurrection. The only cop that died 3 days later due to a heart attack. And I assume that he was murdered by the FBI and they made it look like a heart attack because he was going to tell what really happened. The attacks and violence that were done on January 6th was done by over 200 FBI agents. Former Capitol Police Chief Stevenson said, quote, the crowd was filled with federal agents during his testimony of FBI Director Wray on July 12, 2023. We know that over 40,000 hours of video evidence was deliberately destroyed, deleted, or merely dismissed by the investigating committee. The New York Post even published on September 19th, 2023. And this, you can Google this article. FBI lost count of how many paid informants were at Capitol on January 6th, and later performed audit to figure out exact number. In a letter to FBI Director Christopher Wray on Tuesday, Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan described D'Antuono's testimony as extremely concerning. He said that the letter suggests that the FBI cannot adequately track the activities and operations of its informants, and that it lost control of them present at the Capitol on January 6. These revelations reinforce existing concerns identified by Special Counsel John Durham about the FBI's use of and payment to CHSs who have fabricated evidence and misrepresented information. That's in the New York Post. They admit that they lie. You got to understand, guys, if we allow Democrats to win in America, we will be gone without hope of recovery. The economy will go the way of Venezuela. Just Google what happened once they banned guns in their country. Look at Cuba, the USSR, North Korea, etc. There will never be another free election in this country. The cheating is blatant. If you don't see it, you aren't looking. Only Trump recognizes this. Freedom of speech, the bedrock of civilization, will be gone. We already have proof from the FBI whistleblowers that the FBI has strong-armed all the social media companies to censor and delete accounts that speak for the truth against Democrats, against the COVID lies, etc. You think that if they win, they won't target Bible speech or people who say that Jesus is the only way to heaven? Think about it. Isn't that hate speech against other religions? Look, there might be bad Republicans, but the Republicans' platform does not specifically endorse the teachings of demons. The Democrats' platform endorses the teachings of Baphomet, Ishtar, Loki, and Hermaphrodite. That's the transgender fluid LGBTQ plus community. The Democrats actively support the doctrines of Kronos, Moloch, and Lilith, the sacrificing of children, with Planned Parenthood and forcing the idea of paid-for murder of children up to 9 months old. They want child sex trafficking. They want the rape of children at the border. The Democrats want God out of school. They want your children indoctrinated by the state for their entire childhood without any say-so by the parents. The Democrats want to make your kids believe they were born in the wrong body. They want to cut off the penises of young boys. They want to cut off the breasts of young girls and to inject them with chemicals to prevent puberty. These are horrific, evil doctrines of demons and Satans. And we let people in America do that to poor innocent children. Democrats want to decide what you can and cannot say, censorship of whatever those in power choose to label as misinformation. Democrats want to displace white people in America by taking your money and giving it to any non-white people from any country who want to come here. Think about it. All of their programs are specifically for minorities. People who are white are ineligible or pushed to the back of the bus. Democrats are racist. They use the racist term of white privilege, which assumes that the abilities and opportunities of an innocent person are based on the color of their skin without regard to that person's ability or character. That's what white privilege means. I look at you, you're white, you must have got where you were because you're white, not because of your skills or your character or the opportunities that you took advantage of or your hard work. They assume that people who aren't white don't know how to get IDs or can't afford to get IDs in America. They literally use the argument that they believe black people are too stupid and therefore too poor to get an ID, something that white people can do. The argument that voter ID is racist is actually a racist argument by the Democrats. Democrats are specifically anti-Christian, anti-Bible. Any religious deference they give is specifically given to non-Christian religions, regardless of the historical fact that this country was founded as a Christian nation. It's evidenced by every historical document, every diary, every news source that remains from that time period. Even our Declaration of Independence mentions the Creator God of the Bible. Let me quote this to you. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's your voting. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established, ours has been around for over 250 years, should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design, an evil design by government, I might add, to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, the people's right, it is their duty, that's your duty, my duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So in summary, guys, Christians need to be involved in politics. We have two choices. You either vote or you pick up a rifle and you do something. I choose to vote, okay? Remember what it said there in the Declaration of Independence. Accordingly, all experience or history has shown that mankind is more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Nobody wants to go to war to fight in our country anymore, right? So we're more accustomed to suffer under these tyrants and these 528 members of Congress that take our hard-earned money. I firmly believe that the time is long past to pick up our rifles and abolish this government, but I refuse to go on a suicide mission because this government is so big and out of control that my single rifle can't fix it. So instead, I vote, and I do all that I can within the corrupt law until such time that our country is fixed, or enough good American men decide that it's time to start fighting. So vote based on biblical values. Voting Democrat is quite literally a vote against God. I do not see how anyone can claim to be a Christian and vote with the doctrine of demons. We need to understand that God is in control. Only God can save us. I get that. I'm not saying only Trump can save us. I'm saying we have two choices, Kamala and Trump. Why would you go with the liar that's pushing the doctrines of demons and cutting off genitals of young kids and aborting babies when Trump doesn't do that? That's your other option. So yeah, vote Trump. I don't care if you like the guy, but he's giving glory to God and he's fighting against the evil demons. Yeah, that's what they are. They're demoncrats, okay? We've got to understand that God expects us to right the wrongs in this world, to turn our nation back to him through action, not merely prayer, and to step in and make sacrifices at times to ensure that justice is done in our country. Remember the people in the Bible: Esther, Joseph, Jael, Jonah, King David. Those are true heroes. Maybe it's time to study the true heroes of the Bible. Until next time, may God bless you all.